everyone. Welcome to another fantastic episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm here, as always, one of your hosts. I'm Nell Shamrell Harrington, previously of Chef, now of Mozilla. And greetings from Seattle, Washington. And we have a full panel today. We've got, as always, Chuck. Chuck, how are you doing today?
Doing great. This week, we launched the Clean Coders podcast. And that's in partnership with Clean Coders, obviously. So yeah, if you're looking for some of the architecture and level up stuff that they cover, check it out.
Great. All right. And with us is our other panelist, Scott. Scott, how's the weather in Bend, Oregon today?
It's doing pretty good. So just writing a lot of TypeScript, doing a lot of AWS these days. So excited to be here today.
Awesome. We're glad to have you. And we're also very glad to have our new regular panelist, Tyler Bird. Tyler, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, Nell. I appreciate it. I am coming from Stark and Wayne. We're cloud superheroes, and as in Tony Stark and Bruce Wayne. And we have what I've been doing with them for the last 3.5 years is going around to different Fortune 500 companies and helping set up platforms, usually Cloud Foundry, a little bit of Kubernetes, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. And I've known Chuck for a long time. We did Rails Rumble together back 10 years ago and tried to create an amazing app that nobody ever really enjoyed, but so did hundreds of other people. But it was a really fun experience. And yeah, I just wanted to contribute what I can to the DevOps podcast here. So go on some adventures with all of you, etc.
Excellent. Well, we are very glad to have you in our adventuring party. And we have a special guest today. We have Martin Wimpress from Canonical. Martin, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I'm the engineering director for Ubuntu Desktop, Snapcraft and Developer Advocacy at Canonical. And when I'm not working on Ubuntu and Snapcraft, I have a recent interest in retro gaming and all things open source and Linux as well. So I like to make things and tinker with stuff.
If you're a DevOps engineer, learning is constant. There's always something to keep up on, new technology to manage containers, how to keep everything up to date, what's going on in the Linux ecosystems that you're managing, et cetera, et cetera. Educative.io helps with that. They're a platform made from the ground up with software and DevOps engineers in mind. Instead of making you scrub back and forth through videos and spend hours on setup, their courses are text-based and feature live coding environments so you can skim back and forth like a book and practice in browser as you learn. One of the courses I recommend is a practical guide to Kubernetes. Kubernetes can get a little bit complicated, and this just breaks it down step by step and walks you through the whole process. It's awesome. They have other courses that cover topics from DevOps to machine learning, system design, and much more. And each course has a free preview so you can poke around free of charge. On top of that, you can visit educative.io/adventures to get 10% off any course or subscription. Check it out today.
Great. Well, we are glad to have you. And let's go ahead and get started. Can you give us a bit of history of Canonical? Now, I always associate Canonical very much with Ubuntu. How has Canonical evolved? How has Ubuntu evolved from your perspective over the past 15 years?
Well, so my first involvement with Ubuntu was obviously as a user of Ubuntu right in the very early days. So I was running one of the alphas or betas of Warty Warthog, just before it launched in October of 2004. And I was looking for a new Linux home at the time, and I'd been through a couple, and I found Ubuntu, and I stuck with it for a long time. Because it lived up to that promise of, it just works and it was Linux for human beings. And I was in a place where I didn't want to just keep experimenting with my Linux installations on my laptop. I was at a place where I wanted to start getting stuff done. So Ubuntu was that operating system for me. And in terms of how it's evolved, I mean, it really was, desktop focused in those early days. I was pretty much on the sidelines looking in for many years. I didn't start making my first significant contributions to Ubuntu until 2010 myself. But by that time, of course, Ubuntu had grown quite a significant following and deployment for its server offering as well. was quick to be adopted in AWS. And I think that whole sort of philanthropic effort from Mark Shuttleworth in those early days to deliver the best of open source to everybody, free of cost, and it didn't matter how much money you had or where you were in the world or what language you spoke, everyone had access to Ubuntu. And I think those early years were certainly pivotal in the adoption and subsequent widespread use of Ubuntu, be it on the desktop or in the cloud or your own home servers or, private cloud. And then in terms of where it's going now, in recent years, there's been a brief foray into mobile devices. Fortunately, that didn't pan out. But out of that came a new strategy towards IoT, and that's certainly a big focus for the company right now, is Ubuntu Core and Snaps, and focusing on the IoT markets.
And I understand you created one of the official recognized Ubuntu flavors. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I created, with the help of a Canonical employee who's still at Canonical and I work with now, Alan Pope, created Ubuntu Mate, which is one of the officially recognized desktop flavors. And I started that project in 2014, and it was really an effort to create an operating system for my family, who I'd moved over to Ubuntu in 2006. And they're not particularly technically inclined. They know how to use the computers in a paradigm that they're familiar with. And there was a lot of change going on around that time with, Unity and GNOME 3. And my family weren't too enamored with any of this. It was all too high tech and whizzy for them. So I started contributing to the Mate desktop project, which was the continuation of the desktop environment that they were most familiar with, and then subsequently made Ubuntu Mate, which was a means by which they could continue to use their computers in the manner to which they've become accustomed. And ultimately, that's how I ended up getting hired by Canonical. I came to prominence to people on the desktop team, and in 2016, I was hired by Canonical as a software engineer on the desktop team.
That's a story we hear a lot in open source. Someone starts off as a volunteer contributor, and eventually they get hired on. One of the challenges I know I've experienced is trying to work with a mix of paid volunteers and volunteer contributors, because it's the work, maybe not the workflow is different, but the time that things can be done, the way you assign work is very different. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this from both sides of the fence. When I was working on Ubuntu Mate in the early stages, I still work on Ubuntu Mate to this day. It's my passion project. It's the thing that I do in evenings and weekends when I'm not, experimenting with other interesting technology. So it's always been done at a time when other people you want to communicate with are not available. So you kind of have this, disconnect in communication. And you'll find that the people that work in the community are very passionate about the things that they do because they are doing it in their spare time. That's a real effective way to gauge their level of interest and commitment to a project that they're investing so much of themselves in their spare time into something. So it's, you have different levels of interest and different passions, because people that are working on it day to day have a set of objectives and tasks that they need to get done that are business priorities. And then they're trying to orientate themselves around the requests and motivations of the community. But I think this is a real strong aspect of Ubuntu, in that there are, I think, 7 or 8 desktop flavors now. And what that means is there are 7 or 8 communities within Ubuntu that all disagree about how the desktop should be presented in one way or the other. But what they all do agree about is this commons of software that we all work on collaboratively. And, people at Canonical are part of that community collaboration, because without the people at Canonical to be there to sponsor uploads and sponsor new packages and help with bug triage and all the rest of it, and also provide the infrastructure that creates these things, it's a very symbiotic relationship. And recently, I've come back to the desktop team. So although I was hired to the desktop team, I moved into Snapcraft for several years, and I've recently come back to the desktop team. And one of the first things I did was we had a sprint with some of our community contributors, specifically the designers and developers of the theme that we've been using in the Ubuntu Desktop since 1810, which is called Uru. And we had a 1-week sprint where we invited them to, the Canonical offices in London, and there was 5 of them, and I think there was 4 or 5 of us from Canonical, and we sat round, the big desks in one of the open areas for a week, and worked through all of the things where they felt we could assist them better. We worked through things where we had more advanced workflows that required less manual effort, exploiting CI/CD pipelines and automation that they didn't have set up in their project yet. So we were able to contribute that to their project to relieve some of the manual churn that they had. And then we got our design team in, and we worked through some new SketchUps of some new ideas about how we could present the desktop. And I'm running it here now. No one else can see this right now, but I have the current incarnation of that, which we released in Ubuntu 20.04, which is our next LTS due in April. But the feedback we got from those guys is that was a really energizing week for them. They got direct contact to everybody that they needed contact with at Canonical. And in order to keep that level of collaboration and contact up, we've now scheduled a series of regular video calls with that team, so that they're not just at the end of IRC out of band when we can fit them in, but we've got dedicated time set aside to work with them. And I think that is key to really fostering and maintaining those community contributors' interest and commitment, by working alongside them and treating them as an extension of the overall project, not something other.
Any questions from the rest of the panel on this topic?
Yeah, I think I have a question. And I think it mostly, to me, one of the things I watch regularly is Data is Beautiful on YouTube, to give them a plug. And Data is Beautiful, puts out all this information. And I've been an avid Linux user for the last decade. And so from my perspective, Linux has taken over my life. And I've even had other alternate operating systems than Windows. What I'm trying to say here is that Windows is not a predominant thing in my life. It's usually something that I format over and put Linux on in favor of. But when I looked at the market share in this Data is Beautiful video, it said that Windows still had over 50% of the market share. And is there, I guess my question is, with how the market works and how much these other operating systems, even Mac OS has a larger marketing share, how aggressive is Ubuntu and Canonical trying to be in order to get more people on board? Or is it more the aggression or focus to be on making the experience better? To gain market share or to make the experience better? That's probably the best way to put it.
Right. Okay. So I think we're focused on both of those things, right? We're focused on improving the experience because I think we need to continually improve the experience in order to grow market share. And there's a couple of ways that we can do that. There's obviously desktop Linux enthusiasts like yourself. You've found desktop Linux. It's struck a chord with you, and this is now the way that you're operating your computers. And I've been in that camp since the mid 1990s, and I couldn't imagine being productive in any other way. But there are still people that find Linux anew today, next week. And I would hope that Ubuntu is, a red carpet that they can walk down into, the Ubuntu community. And we will always attract those, technically minded enthusiasts. Linux distributions will, not just Ubuntu. People will find Linux if they're interested in technology and computing. In terms of what we're doing to grow market share, we have a number of partnerships with tier one OEMs. I'm not going to mention the names, but think of three, and that's the three I'm referring to. And they're all shipping Ubuntu pre-installed on a range of devices now, from the very high end and excruciatingly nicely designed, right the way down to sort of consumer level products. Now, where we are, sorry.
Does any of those rhyme with Nell's first name?
Yes, obviously Dell's like the go-to there. It's no secret.
Oh man, I added it. Sorry.
It's no secret that Dell have been shipping Ubuntu on their XPS Developer Edition.
Yeah, the XPSs are amazing. Yeah.
So that's obviously a driver for us to improve, because they have a significant number of people buying those laptops. And Dell would not be shipping Ubuntu if it didn't meet the needs of them and their customers. So we're continually improving how we offer Ubuntu on the desktop to meet the needs of those OEMs. And that's, by and large, pushing how we enable new hardware, because, devices are moving increasingly to 2-in-1 form factor. So we're doing a bunch of work there to improve the desktop experience on 2-in-1s. And then there's, more interesting hardware that's commonplace in those devices now. And we're working with, other providers of that hardware in order to improve that. But then there's an extension of being successful in delivering, Ubuntu on those tier one devices, which is you now have enterprise organizations who are looking to deploy Linux on the desktop for a plethora of reasons. In some cases, it's design. In some cases, it's AI ML. In some cases, it's product development. In some cases, it's like, DevOps and just straight up development, that you're deploying to the cloud. And they're starting to use these offerings from the tier one vendors as a means to, ingest new devices into their organization. And now they're looking to us to provide the same kind of enterprise desktop story that you would get if you had, one of the other major desktop platforms. So, that's definitely a focus for us there to improve how you can deploy and orchestrate Ubuntu Desktop at scale within enterprise organizations.
So I was recently installing different flavors of Linux on an inexpensive, you could call it mini book, not an ultra book. It's thin. I got it at plug for Costco, whatever. And it's an HP. So it came with Secure Boot. And with Secure Boot, we have the hardware that kind of gets in the way of booting things outside of Windows, because by default, the signatures that are on the machine are compatible with Windows. And so as I had to get the BIOS settings and tinker with that, I would switch back and forth. And what all that is, what I mean to be saying by that is that what is this type of support that the desktop experience has with hardware security modules and those type of things?
Okay, so Secure Boot's an interesting one. So we recently did some work with NVIDIA because the NVIDIA GPU drivers are outside of the Linux kernel source tree. They're distributed as DKMS modules. And that had traditionally, the latest versions of those drivers had traditionally been shipped in a PPA. And we would have like the most recent stable release in the archive also shipped as DKMS modules. But in order to use them, it required that you disable Secure Boot for the key signing reasons that you bring up. But what we've done now is those NVIDIA drivers are now built as pre-compiled binary modules that are ABI compatible with the kernel that we ship, and we sign them as part of our build process. So now, since 1910, when you install on NVIDIA hardware, you can tick a box during the install to say, give me the third-party drivers. And if you have an NVIDIA system, it will pull down those drivers. And it will install signed versions of those drivers so that you don't need to, enable or disable secure boot in order to get that working. And then we're doing similar things, with other modules as well. Or, we want to do something similar with other new hardware that's coming down the pipe later this year.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll have to give that a try, because this is essentially just a machine where I can test those type of things and play with different Linuxes and putting those things back on and off. So I want to give that a try, because I think the one I installed on here was 1804. So
Gremlin is a chaos engineering service built by engineers from companies like Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Dropbox. To learn more about chaos engineering, join the Slack community over at gremlin.com/Slack. With thousands of active members, it's a great place to network and find resources to improve your organization's resilience.
So when was it that the next version is going to drop, 2004?
It's April. I'm going to guess April the 26th, thereabouts. It will be a Thursday. So whatever the last Thursday in April is, let's have a look. April 23rd. April 23rd.
And is Ubuntu Mate the default with that, or what is the default desktop?
So the default official desktop offering from the Ubuntu project is simply called Ubuntu, and that ships with GNOME 3 desktop. And my hobby project is Ubuntu Mate, and that's one of the official flavors, which obviously comes with the Mate desktop. They're quite different. They have different usage paradigms. GNOME is a far more contemporary desktop operating system in terms of how it's presented and how you interact with it, compared to Ubuntu Mate, which is very much reminiscent of what people recognize from Windows and macOS from a decade ago.
Well, it's interesting. I might try that if I want to get super adventurous with my mom. So essentially about 10 years ago, the computer that I inherited to her that was a Windows machine, I'd have to format it every year to get rid of all the malware and everything like that. And we got her a Mac, and I've never had to format it since. So it would be interesting, I think, to see, and I would love to report back to you my experiences, to see how it would be for a retired octogenarian running Ubuntu Mate. But yeah, I think that would be pretty fun. It could lead to one of our other questions on here, which is, do we ever see the year of the Linux desktop?
Well, every year is the year of the Linux desktop, of course.
we hear that a lot. Such and such a year will be the year of the Linux desktop. Yeah. And I mean, for hobbyists like many of us on this panel and such, I think I came to Ubuntu around 2004, 2005 as well. Right. It's been the year of the Linux desktop for a while, but for the larger desktop market, do you see Linux becoming more appealing there? It sounds like you're doing work to make it so.
Yeah, I mean, the Linux desktop market share is growing. It's still small, but it's growing relative to the installations of the other operating systems. And generally, desktop is declining slightly, but there will always be a requirement for desktop operating systems. There's a number of things you're simply not going to be able to do effectively on exclusively touch devices for many years to come. But yeah, it's a fantastic meme, isn't it? The year of the Linux desktop. But each year we see increased volumes of sales from the tier one vendors shipping Ubuntu. So we know there's an increase in appetite in the professional market, particularly among developers You will also see commonplace, that cross-platform app developers quite often have Macs as their machine of choice, because that's simply the only way they can target all of the different desktop environments with the requirement on Xcode. Anyone that isn't tied to developing for the Mac ecosystem can be as effective, on Ubuntu, particularly because of the Snap Store and the work we've done with a number of the big ISVs there to bring sort of the full suite of desktop IDEs and development tools that are very quick and simple to install and come directly from the vendors, rather than what is traditionally recognized in the Linux ecosystem as volunteers packaging software as a passion project. We're trying to reinvent that a little bit and empower ISVs to publish their software directly to users and devices, so that those users have the confidence that this is published with authority from the vendor and is the latest stuff. So it's really taking, the whole App Store paradigm that is popularized by mobile devices ostensibly, and bringing that to the Ubuntu desktop and the Linux desktop at large.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And as the engineering director, what do you find is your ability to juggle the paid employees versus volunteers who are active in the community of desktop?
Yeah, we touched on this earlier. We're doing pretty well there. We had this recent sprint with the Yuru guys, and I think that was a template that we reused from the work we've done with Snapcraft. So over the years, we've done 4 or 5 Snapcraft summits, which are events. They're basically hackfests, week-long hackfests. And it's a mix of people. It'll be 20 or so people from Canonical. We go somewhere in the world, and we sponsor a whole bunch of people from across the community and industry to come and join us for the week. And we bootstrap them in how to snap applications, or maybe we want them to improve the integration for a particular language ecosystem within Snapcraft itself. So it's easier to snap applications for a particular language like Rust or Go or whatever it might be. And by doing several of those, we've now got a formula for how to effectively manage people from industry and community in the same room together, and go fast over a short space of time and get some real tangible results out of it. So we're quite skilled at this, and this isn't a new thing. Canonical and Ubuntu were doing this since day one on a much grander scale, because back in the day you had the UDSs, the Ubuntu Developer Summits, and at their height there would be 700 people attending those events. So it's a well-trodden path for Ubuntu and Canonical, and long may it continue.
So I'm a little curious. We've talked a lot about Linux on the desktop. Has that always been Ubuntu's focus? Because my original exposure to it was on the server, right? And getting in, and it's like, oh, well, this is a nicer flavor of Debian, is essentially the way it was pitched to me. And I didn't even know anything about any company called Canonical until a few years ago. So
yeah, it did start on the desktop. Ubuntu's first mission was desktop Linux. That was the initial goal, but it was very soon after that the interest in server came around. So by 2006, which was the first LTS, there was a server edition and a desktop edition of Ubuntu then. So and then Ubuntu has tracked the sort of success of the public clouds ever since, and has made sure that Ubuntu is well represented in the public clouds, and we work very closely with all the public clouds to make sure that the Ubuntu they have available there is tuned to the specific environment that they're operating, so you get the best possible Ubuntu experience tailored for each of those clouds. So yeah, it was only a matter of 18 months between it just being desktop and it having an LTS server release. And although I'd been using it on the desktop, it was using it on the desktop at the time. I used to work doing large data center workloads, and I started switching to Ubuntu around that time because it offered a little bit more quality and some guarantees on sort of sustainability that I was looking for at the time.
So I did have a question. So I've not been a Linux desktop user for a number of years, but I am kind of curious about Snapcraft. Like, can you kind of give a little, like, more of like a broader overview, like how long has it been around? You know, like, is it supported on a number of, obviously I'm sure it's supported on many Linux distributions, but I guess it's mostly targeted at desktop. I mean, I see that it says cloud and IoT as well, but I'm kind of curious at a high level,
Okay.
what's the pitch of it?
So the shortest elevator pitch that we have is Snapcraft is the brand. So snapcraft.io, and Snapcraft is the app store for Linux. So when people ask what is Snapcraft, what are snaps, it's the app store for Linux is the simplest answer. Now, the origins of snaps themselves came from the phone era, where clicks were developed as a means to deploy software onto the phone. And clicks were a bit like APKs, but didn't have some of the confinement capabilities. And snaps were that evolution. And but then we saw the immediate opportunity for, well, this strictly confined, isolated mechanism would be great for IoT. So the initial focus for Snaps and Snapcraft is really the IoT markets. Now, as it happens, there's a number of properties of Snaps that a number of the ISVs for desktop applications found particularly attractive. So we saw a lot of interest and uptake using Snaps for desktop applications. So what's nice about Snaps is it's a way to package and deploy your software directly to Linux users and devices. But one package published once in the store can be used for targeting IoT devices, cloud deployments, private cloud, home server, desktop. So this one system can be used for all of those use cases. And from day one, it was designed to be a cross-distribution solution. So again, you don't just package this software up once and are able to deploy it to lots of Ubuntu. There's around 50 distributions that are supported now. And this is particularly attractive to ISVs because targeting Linux is hard, particularly on the desktop, because not only do you have to prepare a deb, you have to prepare a deb for Debian and the old stable version of Debian and the upcoming version, and then probably several for Ubuntu because, you know, the LTSs are sticky and, you know, there are 4 supported LTSs available at the moment that goes back to 2012. And then there's all the other distributions as well. And for 1 RPM for a single Fedora release won't do it either. But with a snap, you can create a snap today and it will work all the way back to Ubuntu 16.04. And it will also work on Ubuntu 20.04 that comes out in April and Ubuntu 2010 that comes out in October without you having to, you know, re-upload or change the packaging. So, you know, it's that capability for ISVs to target this one thing and hit a large, broad audience of Linux users.
So Martin, because it's called a store, I assume that means that you can either sell software or sell subscriptions through the store. Is that right?
Yes, but curiously, only as part of the IoT device story at the moment. So we are on the roadmap. We do have, you know, adding paid apps in the store. But you can imagine a lot of people that are publishing software these days, if it's the traditional open source desktop enthusiast developers, it's typically open source. So there often isn't a payment to be had there. But we'd like to enable this so that those people that are looking to create some monetization in order to help sustain projects have a means to do that through the store. And then you've got the big ISVs who they've already got some payment mechanism already catered for. You know, they'll have a freemium version of their application and they'll have a means to take payment. So there hasn't been a pressing requirement to add a payment backend to the store, but it is something that we're going to do. However, on the devices side of things, you have organizations out there who are shipping Ubuntu Core IoT devices that leave the factory as a single purpose device, a smart speaker. No, in fact, a better example is a electric power metering device. And that's the one thing it does on day one, but it's connected to the store, and then customers of that device can then choose over-the-top services to add. So there's a smart speaker app for this device, and you can buy that through the store, and it adds that extra capability to the device. Or you could add, you know, a print server capability or whatever it might be. But that's where the monetization exists for the IoT market, where they want to evolve a device over time. And this is attractive to the device manufacturers because they want to, you know, traditionally it used to take months or years to bring new devices to market. And really, device manufacturers these days, they want to come to market in a matter of weeks. So they want to get a device out as fast as possible. And it doesn't need to be it can be the MVP. And then they know through the mechanisms that exist in Ubuntu Core for atomic updates and transactional updates and the always up-to-date security profile and the confinement and isolation that exists between the applications that are running on the device, they can augment the capability of the device over time and build out, because they can reliably push new updates to the device all the time. And we have a number of organizations doing this. And they even have like uplifts in their applications themselves. So you can buy a device from Thingbox, which is a home network monitoring solution for consumers. And that can go into your home. It's running Ubuntu Core and it does all its good stuff. But DevOps are the parent organization, and they have a pro version of this network scanning and security capability. So you can, if you want, if you're like super keen like I am, you can buy the upgrade and then get the uplifted experience.
And so, Martin, I also was curious, is there much in the way of games in that Snap store, the Snapcraft store?
There are. They're predominantly open source games that you'll be familiar with, but there are a few indie titles in there as well. It's particularly well suited for games, as it happens. I mean, snaps are particularly well suited for games because games tend to bundle all of their runtime requirements together, and that suits the way that snaps are composed. So actually creating snaps of games is a great way to, you know, deploy your games. And we've had, you know, some people doing that, but not as many as I would have liked, I'll be honest.
So one of the things I like to share occasionally is the ComScore released some user data on people's activity on phones. And the number one activity on a phone, it's not social media, it's not watching video, it's people playing games. Yeah. And specifically one of basically the largest game that's out there right now is doing puzzles. And so I was like, I wonder, you know, like, is there a good puzzle game on Linux desktop?
Oh yeah.
I've never heard of people doing puzzles on a computer, but hey, I'm sure it's possible.
So the gaming on Linux scene is very vibrant right now. And I'm delighted about that. I have a lot of gear here, including quite a capable workstation that I play all my games on Linux. Now, that was really catalyzed when Valve launched Steam for Linux some years ago. That was the thing that got it in everyone interested. And more so about 18 months ago when they brought Proton forward, which is the mechanism to run Windows-only titles from the Steam store on Linux, and that there's now thousands of Windows-only titles that run extremely well under Proton. But then I'll give a hat tip to an excellent website called Gaming on Linux, which is run by a friend of mine, Liam Dorr. And you will just see the fire hose of updates on a daily basis of all of the energy around the gaming scene on Linux. And it's not just indie developers, but, big publishers too. So right now, it's a pretty great time to be a desktop Linux user. At no time in the past have I felt that I have complete computing parity with, my peers that are running Windows and Mac OS.
Are you stuck at home climbing the walls when you should be hanging out with the community at the latest conference to get canceled? Are you wondering where to hear your JavaScript heroes like Amy Knight and Douglas Crockford and Chris Heilman? After the cancellations, I decided to put on a JavaScript conference for you, online. I invited my favorite folks from around the web and got them to come speak at an online event just for you. Go to jsremoteconf.com and check out our speakers and schedule. The conference is on May 14th and 15th. The call for proposals is open until March 31st. Come join us at an online conference that we guarantee will keep you safe and keep you informed. jsremoteconf.com.
Cool. Very cool. Yeah, sorry, I want to correct myself. I said puzzles. I meant coloring. Coloring is the number one app.
Coloring. Yes.
Yeah.
I have seen a few of those, but yeah, I know the ones you mean. My daughter likes one of those
my wife colors on her phone, so
yeah.
Well, I know part of the reason I wanted to bring us towards gaming, it was because I noticed that there was a lot of in the doc, there was a lot of talk about 8-bit and Commodore 64 stuff. So you want to talk a bit about your enthusiasm there?
Yeah, that's a relatively recent thing. So the friend of mine I mentioned earlier, Alan, we have a couple of outside of work interests. One of which is podcasting, and the other that we've recently discovered is nostalgic views on retro gaming from the past, from when we were school kids. And he was very much in the Sinclair Spectrum camp, and I was very much in the Commodore 64 camp. And some months ago, we found ourselves having a stand-up argument about the merits of each of those platforms. And one thing led to another, and we decided that we needed to share our opinions with the world. So we now do occasional live streams of 8-bit retro gaming battles where we take the same game on the Spectrum and the Commodore 64 and then weigh up those merits of those platforms. And that leads us to OBS Studio, which is a remarkable piece of software, which you can use for live streaming to Twitch and YouTube and others. And again, has complete feature parity on Linux that Windows and Mac OS users enjoy, including all the hardware accelerated, video encoding that you really need in order to, maximize the efficiency of the system to do that. So I've had great fun really learning OBS over the Christmas holidays in order to kick off this silly little venture. But then, of course, one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you're thinking about buying an old Commodore 64 off eBay. And I went down that path, and then I thought, you know what? I don't want an old one because I don't have the space and time to be recapping old motherboards and working out where broken traces are on main boards and soldering in patch wires. So after a little bit of research, you suddenly discover that the Commodore 64 is alive and well, and you can buy brand new main boards that you just need to find 30-year-old silicon to plug into. And people have acquired the original case molds from the 1980s and are selling brand new cases for the Commodore 64. And another project has just come around with new keycaps for the keyboard. And so before you know it, I'm buying all sorts of interesting components from around the world. And in fact, here it is. I've recently assembled a nearly new Commodore 64. So other than the silicon, which is 32 years old, and the keyboard, which is reclaimed, the case, the main board, the power supplies, and there's even a re-implementation of the floppy drive that uses USB as as the storage mechanism. So there's great fun to be had with this, and Alan is off doing the same. There's a whole world of discovery on re-implementations of the Spectrum platform, and he's doing the same with Spectrums.
Cool, very cool. Maybe you can, when we do picks here in a minute, you can tell everybody your some of your favorite 8-bit games.
Oh,
Yep.
sure, yeah.
And speaking of, before we move on to picks, because we're starting to get toward the end of our hour, I wanted to get your opinion on this. So I feel like open source largely achieved its goal of the 90s, which is to have everyone, businesses, educational facilities, government agencies, et cetera, running open source software in at least part of their business. Where do you see the open source world going, and what part do you think Canonical will play in it in the next 15 years?
Wow. That's a big question.
I realize that's a big question. So feel free to answer any sub questions within there that you like.
Yeah. So certainly, yeah. Open source is now the lingua franca within the IT and computing industry for sure. There are some organizations and there are some niche areas where it hasn't penetrated yet, but I think it will in time. Most new software endeavors tend to be open source these days, and it would be almost foolish not to use an open source model. And Canonical and Ubuntu have had those sort of commitments to enabling innovators with the best that open source has to offer right from the very beginning, and has been successful doing that in a non-profit way. And now the trick is, and this is a challenge for the open source industry at large, is how does everything stay sustainable? How do we continue to offer Ubuntu? How do we monetize Ubuntu? And, we saw last year with some disputes with some of the object storage database vendors and some of the clouds, disagreeing on how things were being monetized or not being monetized, or where they felt recognition was due. So I think the challenge now for open source is to remain open source by finding viable business models and monetization strategies. And the same is true for Ubuntu. We are now enjoying some commercial success, and we need to continue to build on that. And we need to appeal to enterprise customers at the right price with the right features that attract them to buy into the Ubuntu and Canonical ecosystems. So I think there's going to be some economic, churn there as to how people pitch and reprice their offerings because it's scaling out so much more. The traditional pricing structures don't work so well. So, we came up with a single pricing structure last year, which is very simple to follow and effective.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Martin. So glad to have you on the show. It was great to get your perspective. And let's go ahead and move on to picks as we come toward the end. I have two this week. They are both YouTube channels or YouTube related. The first, if you follow me on Twitter, you may have noticed I've taken an interest in capture the flag competitions, which are often kind of focused on internet security, but various reverse engineering challenges, packet sniffing challenges, all to capture these flags and hopefully win it. I'm hoping to compete in one sometime this year. A YouTube channel I found is called Live Overflow. And what it does is it goes through lots of things you can use in capture the flag, but also lots of, computer security, reverse engineering, penetration testing topics, and explains them in a very clear manner. So definitely recommend this one if you are interested in CTF competitions at all, or if you're just interested in understanding the security, whether you're red team, blue team, and more. The second one is I've also taken more of an interest in hardware hacking recently, which means I'm learning how to solder. And I found this series it says copyright 1980. Judging from the hairstyles, it has to have been filmed in the 1970s. And it is the clearest explanation of soldering, the science behind it, why you do certain things certain ways that I've found. I will put a link to that and Live Overflow in the show notes. The only thing I caution is if you're watching the soldering video, they recommend lead-based solder. Don't do that these days. Just don't. You don't want to risk lead poisoning. However, everything else in the video is absolutely solid. And Chuck, what are your picks this week?
Well, this week, for one, I want to just shout out about the Clean Coders podcast, devchat.tv/clean-coders. Episode 1, we talked to Uncle Bob Martin about his book, Clean Agile. And there were a lot of gems in there. If you're trying to implement Agile or figure out what's going on, terrific stuff. And then episode 3, we talked to, I think he's the head of engineering at Thinkful, which is an online boot camp kind of setup. Again, great stuff about leveling up, finding mentors. Just solid stuff. There were some other ones where we talked to people about how they learned or how they manage their teams and how they get people to get on board with writing high quality code. So anyway, just tons of great stuff. I've recorded 9, I think, episodes so far. This week, as we're recording this, we're putting one out every day for the launch. So there should be a bunch out there by the time you're hearing this, because we're a month or two ahead on Adventures in DevOps. So I'm really digging that. And then I'm going to get my taxes filed this afternoon, which when I say that, to me at least sounds like I'm saying I'm going to get my teeth yanked this afternoon. But yeah, I've been going through and using QuickBooks Online to finish getting my books all lined up for 2019. And anyway, it makes it relatively easy to get all this stuff figured out. So yeah, I'm digging that. I like doing my own books because it gives me kind of a feel for where the money's going. So anyway, QuickBooks Online is going to be another pick.
Awesome. Scott, how about you?
So, all right, because of all the wonderful things going on with the coronavirus in the world, I figured I would, I'm kind of curious about this topic in general. And so there's this book that my wife read and then recommended to me and I've read, and it's called The Next Pandemic by Ali S. Khan. So he's actually like somebody who worked for the CDC, which is the Center for Disease Control. And so he worked as a researcher and traveled all over the world, kind of helping out with all these different things. So I think it's very related and interesting. And we've seen how, the coronavirus has kind of spread crazily. And so I think it's a really interesting subject, very, a lot of good stories. So, I have a book, that was my book recommendation. I was going to make a YouTube recommendation as well. So I've been watching a lot of things around, a lot of math-based videos and stuff. And so one of the favorite channels I've come across is 3 Blue, 1 Brown. And he goes into a lot of, descriptions of like Bayesian theorems, linear algebra stuff, a lot of stuff around machine learning, neural networks. So I think that's a pretty good little YouTube channel to check out as well. So those are my picks.
Awesome. And Tyler, how about you?
Hey, thanks. This week I have found a really cool thing online as I listened to the gamers going back and forth to kind of dovetail back into what we were saying before about gaming. And a lot of people are freaking out about Google Stadia not being, as a panacea. And I think one of the biggest frustrating things with Google Stadia is that you can't bring your own game. And so NVIDIA has launched something called GeForce Now, which allows you to bring the licenses that you have for Linux, for Windows, for whatever system you have on Steam. And not every single game is on there yet. I was looking for other titles that like Grand Theft Auto. I think there's probably licensing things they have to keep going through. But I booted up a game and I haven't upgraded my hardware and my machine for many years. I have a GeForce 760, so a mid-range from 5 generations ago, right? And so I can play Minecraft just great, which is what I play most of the time, but it doesn't necessarily play the most modern games. And I booted up one of the most modern games that I've bought recently, a Total War 3 Kingdoms. And the benchmark it ran everything on Ultra. And I don't really have that great of an internet connection here where I'm at right now. And so, yeah, I'd recommend checking that out. It's pretty interesting. The other thing is that I'm wanting to do some streaming online with my Dell R710, and I want to be able to capture the video from that. And I have the other hardware to capture it with like a Elgato, HD60 S, but that requires an HDMI input, and the video out from the Dell R710 is VGA, as it should be. So I just looked online and found an adapter, and so that'll be in the link for people who might be wanting to take old tech and put it online or stream it. So yeah, I might have some questions for you later about OBS. So we'll see how that goes.
I'll be happy to answer them.
Excellent.
And I've been a GeForce Now beta user for over a year, so I was delighted to see that come GA this past week.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I can't wait to not play all of my games on the cloud because I'm too busy anyways. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I am excited for that option, and I do think that will be a really fun thing. I was disappointed to see that in the general release that they don't support iOS devices yet, but I'm sure that'll be around very shortly. The thing that I would love to see it the most on is on the Switch, though. If they can release it for the Switch, and then you literally could take all your games with you everywhere. It would be great.
All right. Thank you, Tyler. And Martin, how about you?
Oh, goodness. Well, I've mentioned a few things, but maybe there's some listeners who have been on the periphery of, desktop Linux for some time and might be interested to find out more, after some years away. So I would encourage you to come to ubuntu.com/blog, which is updated all the time with interesting stuff that's going on in and around Ubuntu and Canonical across, desktop, cloud, Kubernetes, OpenStack, OpenMano, IoT, robotics, telecommunications. There's a wealth of stuff going on there. And if any of those things are interesting to you, I would absolutely urge interested listeners to come to the canonical.com careers page. So we touched on Canonical, some people not knowing what that is. Canonical is the commercial sponsor of Ubuntu and other projects. And we have a whole host of job postings available at the moment, and we would welcome people to come and apply. And if you apply, your CV will be in the system, or your resume will be in the system. And you'll be in the queue for future job postings that you might be a skills match for in the future as well. And if you're interested in dipping back into Ubuntu, then there's a couple of community sites that are definitely worth taking a look at. That's OMG Ubuntu, which is a fanzine all about Ubuntu. That's regularly updated. So if you want to dip into what's going on there, do that. And then I mentioned gamingonlinux.com, everything that's going on around the Linux gaming scene. They're definitely worth a read. It might entice you back in. And then Snapcraft.io .store /store is a glance at all of the software that's available for Linux these days, and you might be surprised to what you find in there and how much of the feature parity gap has been closed in recent years. So those were the places I would say people should come to. And if you're looking at retro gaming and converting signals, then I've recently bought a device from retrotink.com. So if you've got old kit that you need to convert signals for, RetroTink have a device for you, probably. They're interesting little gizmos.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you, all the panelists, for being here. Thank you, Martin, for being our guest. And thank you, as always, to our listeners for listening to us. And have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone.
Bye. Max out, everybody.
Thanks very much.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.